Well, good morning, everyone. I feel like I had a little bit of a missed opportunity I need to share about. The sermon title is Waiting with Isaiah for Joy. We are in the third week in the series of Advent, which is typically associated with waiting, hence the waiting. We are looking at texts from the Hebrew prophet Isaiah, hence the with Isaiah. And this morning we're talking about joy. So, waiting with Isaiah for joy. I just wanted to share how creative our sermon titles have been. Normally, I usually have some type of like music or movie reference connected to mine, and if it weren't for the precedent set by the last two, I would have probably called this morning The Pursuit of Happiness, which, yes, is a phrase in the Declaration of Independence, but it's also a fantastic movie with Will Smith. But alas, I did not, so we'll have to start somewhere else. Let's start here. The word joy. I want you to just take a moment and think about like what pops in your head when you think about the word joy, and what are the circumstances that you envision when you think about joyfulness. All right. You see, in our culture, I think joy and happiness are often synonymous terms, and happiness is at least one of, if not the sort of ultimate goal, the ultimate pursuit of our life, the purpose of our life in our culture. And what that means is that when happiness is the end goal, right? Life becomes about a pursuit of happiness. And so the grid through which we make decisions is about what minimizes pain or maximizes pleasure. And ultimately, I think that locates us in the temporal, in the temporary, in the circumstances that are around us. Now, I don't want to suggest. I don't want anybody to not be happy. I don't want to suggest that. I'm not trying to take that away this morning. But let's just play this out for a second. This sort of pursuit of happiness, the purpose of joy is an end goal in and of itself. What does that produce in us? How does that shape and inform us? Or does it produce a life of generosity? I mean, it does to the effect that you find enjoyment from giving, but the moment you stop feeling that enjoyment, you are not really pushed to continue and grow in generosity. Does it produce a more loving sort of life? Again, to the extent that I am receiving something, yes. But when I stop receiving something in return for my love, a lot of times I withdraw it, right? It becomes conditional. See, it creates sort of a bit of a self-centered lens, a way of navigating the world around the experiences, around the circumstances, around what things ultimately do for me. I mention that because for the Christian person, joy is not the end goal. It is not the ultimate goal and purpose. Joy is the byproduct of what happens when we orient our lives towards God. It is the byproduct of when we locate our heart, our desires in the eternal. Jesus would use the language of where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The things that you pursue, you desire, you want, you seek out, right? The practical ways that you do it in life, that's where your heart is. When it's located in what is eternal, right? That leads to a deeply rooted contentment, right? We are not as subject to the sort of the whims of what things are doing for us or not. Right? There's a deeply rooted contentment when we orient our hearts toward God and our longing is in the eternal. I use that language because I think the opposite of joy is not anger or sadness or even suffering, opposite of joy is fear. Or fear is what deprives us from joy. And when we approach our lives, when we live in the sort of the temporary, the temporal, what's around us, by nature, by definition, that means those are things that can be taken away. Those are things that we can lose at some point. And so we become motivated out of preservation and protection. Now, for the people of Israel at the time of Isaiah, when he's writing, they had experienced tremendous loss. They had experienced tremendous suffering. And so I think fear manifested for them looked like hopelessness. Isaiah is giving them this grand vision, this dream, this picture of what God is ultimately going to do, how God is going to make things right. He's trying to give them hope when they are hopeless. And I don't know if any of you have experienced that, a kind of foreboding joy, where I don't want to get my hopes up for fear of being let down again. And so that fear there keeps you from actually experiencing or leaning into hope. And so I think as Isaiah is kind of painting this big picture, this dream, he's trying to get the people, his audience, his nation, he's trying to get them to locate their hearts kind of out of the temporary and onto the eternal. So let's take a look. Isaiah 35, 1 through 10. Even the wilderness and desert will be glad in those days. The wasteland will rejoice and blossom with spring crocuses. Yes, there will be an abundance of flowers and singing and joy. The deserts will become as green as the mountains of Lebanon, as lovely as Mount Carmel or the plain of Sharon. There the Lord will display his glory, the splendor of our God. With this news, strengthen those who have tired hands. Encourage those who have weak knees. Say to those with fearful hearts, be strong and do not fear, for your God is coming to destroy your enemies. He is coming to save you. And when he comes, he will open the eyes of the blind and unplug the ears of the deaf. The lame will leap like a deer, and those who cannot speak will sing for joy. Springs will gush forth in the wilderness, and streams will water the wasteland. The parched ground will become a pool, and springs of water will satisfy the thirsty land. Marsh grass and reeds and rushes will flourish where desert jackals once lived. And a great road will go through that once deserted land. It will be named the Highway of Holiness. Evil-minded people will never travel on it. It will be only for those who walk in God's ways. Fools will never walk there. Lions will not lurk there along its course, nor any other ferocious beasts. There will be no other dangers. Only the redeemed will walk on it. Those who have been ransomed by the Lord will return. They will enter Jerusalem singing, crowned with everlasting joy. Sorrow and mourning will disappear, and they will be filled with joy and gladness. Amen. So as Isaiah is casting this vision, as he's sharing this dream of what God is ultimately going to do, that God is going to restore, renew, and recreate. He's going to bring about a day of healing, of making all of this right. But again, I think he's helping them move from the hopelessness to having hope, right? If our lens is to minimize pain, right, then the motivation would be to not get our hopes up. And you can kind of read backwards, right? So think about the things that he's dreaming about, but read it backwards a little bit, and you'll get to see like what kind of life they are living and experiencing then and now. That's important to do because, as we're in the season of Advent, the season of waiting and looking ahead and anticipating, right? God's coming. We can't have hope without lament. We can't look ahead with hope. We can't see what it is we are waiting for if we're not first sort of rooted in what's happening around us. See, for a lot of us, we try to avoid pain and suffering. A lot of times in churches, right, we ignore it. We explain it away. We don't want to address it. This isn't like a power of positive thinking type of thing, right? This is a sitting in the pain and suffering long enough to name it and to cry out to God with the hope that God will do something about it down the road. And that's actually a spiritual practice. It's got a rich history in the Old Testament. Like if you've read the Psalms, like a third of them are just these laments of sitting in and naming and crying out the pain and the suffering to God with the hopes that it would be different. And I think that's a different shift. That's a shift from avoiding in the present to actually engaging with it, but with the hope of it being made right at some point. So, for us to do that, for the people of Israel to do that, to put their hope in God, to orient their lives towards God, towards the eternal, it's kind of a big deal what God is actually like. So Isaiah can have this big dream about all these things that God's going to do, the restoring, the renewing, the healing, right? And yet you can see it right there that he can't separate that from the enemies, the oppressors, the people that have caused suffering for them. He said God's going to do all of these things by destroying our enemies. Right? God's going to do these things by casting out the evil or the wicked or getting rid of them. And that was kind of a prominent connection with the prophets all the way up to the time of Jesus. Even John the Baptist, who Jesus said was the greatest of all the prophets, I think even John the Baptist might have struggled with this. You can see it in Matthew 11, verses 2 through 6. It says, John the Baptist, who was in prison, heard all about the things the Messiah was doing. So he sent his disciples to ask Jesus, "Are you the Messiah we've been expecting, or should we be looking for someone else?" Jesus told them, "Go back to John and tell him what you have heard and seen. The blind see, the lame walk, those with leprosy are cured, the deaf hear, the dead are raised to life, and the good news is being preached to the poor." And he added, "God blesses those who are not offended by me." See, John the Baptist, he was imprisoned at this time. He was a prophet. He had devoted his life to calling people to repent, to turn towards God. And towards the end of his ministry, he said to all of his followers, Jesus is the one. Jesus is the Messiah. You guys all go and follow him. And then he finds himself imprisoned, likely to be executed, which he ended up being. And so he's in jail reflecting, as probably any of us would, reflecting on our life and saying, did I do the right thing? Was I actually right? Was Jesus really the one that I should have pointed people towards? But what was it? What was it about Jesus' life that might have given him pause? Right? Look at the way Jesus answers John's disciples. He said, well, tell them what you've seen and heard. Right? The blind see, the deaf hear, the mute talk, the lepers are healed, dead are raised to life, good news is preached to the poor. Jesus is like, isn't this the vision that Isaiah had? And it's a callback to Isaiah 35 amongst other prophets. Jesus is saying, isn't this the vision, the dream that all the prophets had that they were pointing to, me doing these things? But I think the hang-up for John might have been in the things that Jesus didn't reference, that he didn't quote. He didn't mention anything about the destroying of their enemies, the casting out of the wicked, the punishment for the evil. Right? In fact, one of his teachings was to love their enemies, to pray for those who persecute them. Right? He said if someone slaps you on the cheek, turn to them your other. Right? If a soldier forces you to walk 1 mile with them, walk another with them out of choice, out of love. See, Jesus' radical view. This is a kind of nonviolent resistance. And Jesus' radical view said, no, we're not going to, I'm not here to destroy the enemies. I'm here for us to love them. And this is what that's going to look like. And he adds that little line at the end to John's disciples where he said to him, God blesses those who are not offended by me. And what would they be offended about? He's like healing people, he's helping people, he's taking care of the poor. These are all great things. What is it that would cause offense? I think it's this. Because when your faith system is wrapped up with God's going to deliver us and make things right by getting rid of them, by casting them out, and then God shows up and says, oh, no, we're them too. We're loving them too. That would be a very offensive concept. It'd be very offensive to have your whole faith system that you built around get sort of torn down that way. Heck, it's offensive today. Right? If a Christian author even asks a question about God eternally tormenting people consciously in hell for eternity, right? If a Christian author even mentions that, they receive death threats from Christians. This concept, this idea of loving even those people, whoever they may be, is deeply offensive. So Jesus says, God blesses those who aren't offended by me. I want you to think about that. If our experience, right, if our joy, our happiness, our deliverance, if that's all rooted in getting rid of them, right, then we're focused on the temporary. Right, Mike said this last week. He said, week 1 we kind of talked about waiting for peace. Week 2 we talked about waiting for justice. He said the foundation of peace is justice, right? Is living rightly towards each other. He said the foundation of justice is truth, right? That to do right, you need to see truthfully. But what keeps us from seeing truthfully? I'd argue that it's stuff like this. I think it's rooted in fear. Right? Because if I've already decided that the only way I'm going to experience joy or peace or deliverance or justice or whatever is by getting rid of them, then I don't care about the truth anymore. In fact, truth might be inconvenient for me. All that I want now is justification for what I already believe, have already determined. So if I've already made that conclusion, then I'm not seeking truth. I'm seeking ways to justify that, to back it up. I might even be ignoring or suppressing truth to do that. And so if we're to be the kinds of people who live peacefully and do rightly with each other, it starts by seeing truthfully. And I think that has to be rooted in something very deep. Right? We have to have a deeply rooted contentment. We have to have our hearts fixed on what is eternal. Because if I believe, to the extent that I believe God is going to make things right then, at some point in the future, to the extent that I believe that, I can experience joy in the here and now. Right? That the destination changes the journey itself. I mean, you've probably experienced this in plenty of areas. I know for me, right, I've had like car rides with my kids for like a 30-minute car ride that's been like teeth-pullingly miserable, right? I've had 10-hour car rides that have been enjoyable and fun because we were going on vacation. The destination influences and affects the very journey itself. I think that's what Isaiah is getting at when he talks about the highway of holiness or the holy highway or That's a callback to the Exodus story when God led the people of Israel out of Egypt and into the promised land, but first they spent 40 pretty miserable years wandering the desert and the wilderness. So Isaiah is saying, hey, that just like God did that then, he's going to do that again. Right? But this time, it's not like just a plot of land that we're going to get. This time we're talking about recreation, renewal, restoration, healing, peace, justice. All of these things are coming in the future. And so the destination's that much better, and it's going to transform the very journey itself. And so what was once desert and experienced as death could be experienced as life. And it doesn't get rid of pain and suffering. It doesn't explain it away, but we can sit in it and experience it much differently because of what we're fixated on in the future. To the extent that we believe God will do what he's going to do, we can experience joy now. And I think to the extent that we can live in that deeply rooted contentment, we can seek truth. We can risk doing right with each other. We can make peace here and now while we wait for that to come in the future. So I got a few questions for you this morning. One of them I think is just that, it's just a minor little question. What is the ultimate purpose of your life? But what do you think is it ultimately? Not like what would you write down on an essay and answer somebody, but like what do you actually put your trust in and your treasure in, right? What is it that you pursue day in and day out? Where are you orienting your heart? I think that has a lot of implications for the next question, is where is fear present in your life? Right? Where are you living with motivations of, preservation and protection rather than out of abundance and love? So where is there fear present that's keeping you from living a life of peace, justice, and joy?